Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for Digital Transformation and the Speed of Business. My name is Raleigh Gould, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speakers are Dan Twing, President and COO at Enterprise Management Associates, and Tim Eusterman, Senior Director, Solutions Marketing at BMC. Dan has over 25 years of experience in information systems, software development, and technology outsourcing. Dan focuses on all aspects of intelligent and automated management of IT. With over 25 years of B2B high-tech marketing, Tim leads the development and execution of the market strategy, BU and product positioning, demand and content marketing, and sales enablement for the Digital Business Automation Business Unit and Control M product line. And before I hand things over to today's featured speakers, I wanted the audience to know that Dan and Tim will be concluding today's presentation by taking your questions. Feel free to log them anytime by using the Q&A functionality. If they aren't able to get to your questions, I will send them on to the speakers. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA that will include the on-demand playback, a PDF of the speaker slides, and additional resources. So I hope you will check that email out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Dan Twing. Dan?
Thanks, Raleigh. Today I'll be talking about some trends in workload automation from two viewpoints. First, I'll be discussing how broader trends in IT are impacting workload automation with data from primary research that I've done in 2018 and about midsummer last year in 2019. Then I will discuss the recent EMA Workload Automation Radar Report, covering, real quickly the methodology, and we'll discuss BMC's placement in that report. So if you work in IT these days, you're certainly aware of the drive to digitally transform processes, workflows, stakeholder interactions, whether that be between employees, with customers, with trading partners, and others. In some ways, this really isn't new. It's just a continuation of what IT has always attempted to do to improve business processes. But what is new is the pace of the change and the power that's enabled by nearly ubiquitous network connectivity, prevalence of very powerful mobile devices, and artificial intelligence and machine learning assisted applications. So this drive we've always had to improve processes with automation, that we've just picked up the pace, and we have all these great new tools. And so digital transformation is really sweeping the business world. It's become this idea that it's really integral to achieving business growth. And as a result of that, customers really expect an on-demand experience. They want that technology-driven interaction. And a business who doesn't have it really looks outdated. So businesses are really driving through this. They also really want to create this workforce engagement so that you can make employees more efficient. It really changes the whole way we interact with each other. And it's a positive thing for how we work. We asked a number of organizations in research I did midsummer last year to react to these two statements. First, our organization is rapidly addressing digital transformation. And as you can see, 73% agreed or strongly agreed. That's the dark green and the mid-color green part of that donut chart there on the left. So there's certainly a lot of organizations are working very quickly to do this. We also asked them to react to our organization is modernizing applications to support digital transformation. And actually greater numbers there, so 78% agree or strongly agree. So we know that there's a lot of work to do with the applications to make them even ready for digital transformation. But it's really, as important as it is and as positive as it can be, it's not all fun and games, right? If you're in the middle of this, it's a major change, and change is often stressful and difficult. There are great benefits, but there are also challenges. And from my perspective, I see two really significant trends. First of all, that digital transformation is stressing legacy infrastructure systems and tools. So while we want to do all of these things, if you do them too quickly ahead of making sure that the foundation of your IT environment can handle it, you can create more problems than benefits. You have to have the right infrastructure behind all of that and the right tool set. Because what happens is you really end up empowering customers with these new applications. They have now near real-time information. They have status on every aspect of the availability, expected delivery times, how they interact with your organization has changed. So that's all wonderful until something goes wrong. And now they have a window of transparency into your operation they've never had before. So if you're not prepared to prevent problems proactively or resolve them very, very quickly when they do happen, you've now exposed customers to these problems in ways that just 8 or 10 years ago they wouldn't have been exposed to. For example, let's say that you have an inventory system that updates. Well, most customers wouldn't know if it was supposed to update by 6 a.m. and it didn't update till 10 a.m., right? They walk into the store. 10 years ago it was there. Maybe they'd ask if it was at another store. Maybe an employee would call the other store on your behalf, to find out. Well, today that customer probably has a mobile app that gives them that inventory number. And if it's wrong and they go to the store and it's not really there, you instead of making life better for them, you've just let them down. So these delays, these system slowdowns and outages, they're on full display. And we asked organizations who work in workload in this same survey to react to this statement. Digital transformation is requiring more from our scheduling or workload automation solution. And that's, I'm focusing in on one tool set here, but 74% agreed to strongly agree. Certainly, there's more pressure on these systems with this new transparency. We also asked them to react to the number of scheduling problems and outages directly affecting business outcomes is increasing. 61% agreed or strongly agreed. And I would say that number is likely to go up over time as more organizations bring more of these kinds of digital transform systems online. That, when the problems do occur, they have a more direct impact on the business outcome because you've now given this transparency to your trading partners or your customers. So this big sweeping trend has had an impact on workload automation, and this is a trend that we've been tracking for 5 or 6 years now. It's caused a lot of organizations to reassess their tool sets, and one of those important one is workload automation. So we have seen about 50 to 54% of the market say, yes, I'm actively thinking of changing that underlying software. It started in Europe and North America. We were looking at asking this kind of a question of individuals, and we've seen that number slowly increase, and then in 2018 it's starting to decline a bit only because organizations are actually following through on making that switch. In 2019 is the first time that we asked that question in Asia, and interestingly enough, we see 73% say that they're thinking of changing. And this is really because they're sort of later to the party on this conversation. So they are, there's a lot more pent-up demand there, whereas in Europe, for example, we're seeing that slowly decline because more organizations have actually followed through on that plan to make a change. So overall, the market's about 54% are thinking of this switch, and the real pressure right now is in Asia. And I think a big reaction, the reason this is happening is because of a lot of these pressures we're talking about. Now, I've asked a lot of questions in and around switching or stepping up from lesser scheduling tools to full enterprise-class workload automation tools. We see a consistent theme, and I don't have time to cover the 5 or 6 ways we've asked that question. I think this particular one does a good job of capturing most of the sentiment around why folks are churning on their tool sets. So we asked, what's driving the need to add or change? If you said, yes, I'm thinking of changing, why, what do you think is driving that? And you can see 34%, top of the list, is digital transformation. We also see some more traditional things that workload improved, like the stress around dealing with cloud-based job streams. So is another driver. And cloud has been around for a while, as we know, but I think we're really starting to see in 2019 and 2020 not just born in the cloud new services in cloud operations, but traditional production systems are really starting to move en masse. Where for the first few years of the cloud trend, folks were slow to take that legacy stuff up to the cloud, and it was more the born in the cloud things that were there. And then improving resource utilization and concerns around scalability. These are things Workload has always been good at, and those needs continue to be there. And then application modernization, it's the fifth one in this chart, where we've looked at folks who are moving off of things like Windows Task Scheduler or cron jobs or Azure Schedule, environment-specific kinds of schedulers, and switching to a full enterprise-class workload like BMC's Control-M. We see that app modernization need actually rising to the very top, and digital transformation is the second most mentioned. But those two are always in the mix here as to why folks are thinking about reevaluating and even switching the underlying tool sets for scheduling. And beyond just automating workflows and workloads management, there's a broader push for greater automation generally to make employees more efficient, to empower trading partners further, empower customers further. So these three statements were also part of that survey. Our need for automation is growing rapidly. 80% agree or strongly agree. Our use of automation is growing rapidly. Same 80%. And to me, this is one of the key statements. Our automation is viewed as a strategy in my organization. Is this a key part? 78% agree or strongly agree. So I would say this trend is certainly not going to slow down. It's probably going to continue to speed up, and it's going to continue to impact these kinds of environments. Now, this chart is representing some data from research I did in 2018. If you've come to any of my webinars before, you've probably seen this chart before. What we were really trying to do here is look at the various forms of automation that were in use in IT operations. So we asked, what are you using? How much is automated? And with what kind of tool? So asked around application release processes or big data analytics, core data center functions, sort of the data warehouse ETL processes, DevOps processes, and so on. And you can see that there are various forms of automation being deployed. Even, somewhat to my surprise, there's some robotic process automation. While it's mostly intended for business processes, there are folks that are using that in various ways in and around IT management. Of course, scripting has always been there. But what stood out for me is that workload automation was more ubiquitous than those other forms, and probably by this estimate is touching on average about 45% across those various processes. So it was, I came to the conclusion there that it's the most used form of automation within IT operations. Midsummer last year, I asked that question a slightly different way and said, if you think about the entirety of your IT applications and infrastructure, what percentage of workloads, tasks, and other activities are regularly done to keep things running correctly or automated and controlled by workload automation? So what's the span of control of workload in your organization is kind of the summary way to state that. And I gave them the opportunity to, tell me their answer in percent of things automated. And you can see it looks mostly like a bell curve. There's some down in the low end, 1 to 10%, 11 to 20%, There's some up on the high end, 70, 80, 90% automated. The bulk of users are in that mid-range. And here, if you average all of that out, it averages to about 41%. What I like is it really is in the neighborhood of the chart, the previous chart here. So, I think asking this question two different ways over 2 different years, we're in that 40 to 45% range is what workload is involved in. And I put this overlay on that when I think about it. Those on the lower end, I would say, have a very narrow view of what workload automation could do for them. And I'm going to talk about that in a little more depth on the next slide. The mid part here, I would say, has a very traditional view of workload automation. It's a key tool for IT operations. It does a lot of things, but, it sort of has boundaries. But this group on the high end, I would say, fit in what I would call an enlightened view of workload automation. They're expanding what they do with it, and through other research I won't have time to cover here, this group sees a lot of increased benefit from the use of the tool. So I'm going to talk about the two ends of that chart here, sort of the narrow view and the enlightened view. So when I do the radar report, and I'm going to be talking about the radar here in a moment. When I do that, part of the methodology is to interview 3 users from each of the vendors that I'm evaluating. So I end up with 15, 18 players in the market. I end up talking to 40, 45 different organizations, and I do this report every 2 years. So I've now probably talked to over 100 organizations in that context. And I hear a lot of organizations who fit in this narrow view, but there was one that stood out this year when I did the report where they started by bringing SAP into their environment about 7 years ago. And the tools that come with SAP to schedule the jobs are somewhat limited. So they very quickly realized that they needed to step up their use of scheduling tools, and they brought in a full workload automation product. But it was narrowly focused just on SAP, and they implemented it, and they got all the benefits, and it worked just fine. And that was their only objective. Interestingly, about 2 years ago, they started to get requests from other parts of the IT organization asking if they could also use this tool, but it was being administered and overseen by the SAP team and really was brought in just for their use. But now they have about 8 other teams that are using the tool that they're currently supporting. And so it was just sort of an organic pressure to improve the automation tools across the organization, but it really wasn't policy. And I asked the manager of that department, how that's working out for him. He said, I have a deal with my CIO. If this trend continues and we see other parts of the organization wanting to use it, I'll get additional budget, and we'll have a team still managed within the SAP group that will oversee all of the use of this product. But they're sort of being drugged up the scale of span of control of workload from a need with these other departments, but it's not really a strategy. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, and there are many examples of this, I'm going to talk about one specifically here, and I know that Tim is going to share some customer use cases that also would fit in this enlightened view. But this is an organization who really implemented an enterprise-class workload with the intention of it being for the whole enterprise. And this example was a movie theater business. They have about 3,500 theaters around the globe. A theater business is really as much about the food service as it is about the ticket sales. And so they're running, a complex operation. When they first implemented this workload tool, the full enterprise class tool, they said that they were pulling data once a day from those 3,500 theaters, and their executives were getting probably about a 30-hour old view of their business. And, so once a day they'd sweep the data, they'd go through all the analytics, and the reports would be prepared. As they brought an enterprise-class tool to bear on their situation, not just looking at automating and improving all of the internal workflows, but they reached right out to the edge of their business, and they started to sweep data more frequently out of these theaters. And they said initially they went from once every 24 hours to once every hour, which is a huge improvement, because now the business executives are seeing the impact on their business, maybe 70, 90 minutes delayed instead of 30 hours delayed. And they pushed that trend further, where today they're sweeping data every 15 minutes from those 3,500 theaters. So their executives have a very real-time view of how their business is progressing. But they took it even further. When they take that data, they're using modern analytics tools and business intelligence tools, and they're looking at the impact on the business. And the workload tool is right in the middle of all of that, so that they have automated logic rules that say things like, if we're not getting enough popcorn sales, let's discount the price. So they might drop the price by $1. And they push, the workload tool is actively involved in pushing changes right to the point of sale, right to their electronic menu boards to make that change happen. Likewise, if they see ticket sales slowing on a new movie that's opening, they might anticipate $20 million in sales over a weekend. And by midday Saturday, if that's not tracking, they might decide to do some couponing. Here again, it's all programmed. The business analytics tools do the analysis. The workload tool is then able to, based on those results, push couponing to mobile devices, push things out to the website, and actually change prices on the fly. So they have woven this workload tool right into the heart of the operation of their business. So they've gotten better real-time information, and they're actually changing right at the edge of their business the revenue outcomes. So this is what I think is possible for workload, and we're seeing a number of organizations go there. Part of the challenge of doing that, though, is that if you have too many tools, it's hard to really get any momentum. So we asked organizations to react to this. Our organization has too many scheduling and automation tools. 61% agreed or strongly agreed. We also asked, our organization could be made more efficient by the consolidation of scheduling and automation tools. 73% agreed or strongly agreed. And this just shows that, it's critical to have the right tool and to have enough wood behind the arrow, if you will. Fewer tools with more power really enables the organization in a better way. And ultimately, I think that there's a whole lot more that workload automation can be doing. So we asked them to react to this. Our business would benefit from a more centralized view of all forms of automation across IT. So more of a unification of these tools. 88% agreed or strongly agreed. And we asked, is workload automation one of those tools that should be expanded to orchestrate more automation within the organization? 85% agreed or strongly agreed. And I really think this is a class of tools that can be expanded to make a more unified approach to automation. And the reason for that really is it touches a lot of things in your IT environment. Those two span of control slides I talked about, it's currently on average touching 40 to 45%, and we see some organizations it's way more involved. And if you think about it, it's right in the middle of all of these processes, and there's some key characteristics that you need in any automation tool. And why would you want to reinvent the wheel and administer that in multiple places? Workload brings things like it can orchestrate any kind of process. It has sophisticated event time and time triggers, event triggers. It has, in recent years, the APIs have been opened up. Predictive analytics have been brought to bear. It just does a lot of these things, including things like SLA awareness and role-based security. With all of those capabilities, instead of creating more automation tools where you have to embed those things, by leveraging workload, you already have those things in place. And I think that's an important thing to contemplate. So now I'm going to shift quickly to the radar. This is something that we do every 2 years. The one I did here in Q4 was the 5th installment that we've done over the last 10 years. Real quick, we look at 5 key areas when we measure products in this space. We look at architecture and integration, the functionality, but beyond that, how is it deployed and how hard is it to do that and how hard is it to administer it over time? And how flexible is the licensing, and is it licensable in a way that I want to be measured, by jobs, by CPUs, what have you. So we're considering all of that, as well as who's the vendor that I might be acquiring this from, are they doing a lot of R&D, what's their reputation in the market, and so on. The methodology is to develop a critical list of features, which all of the vendors contribute to. We then summarize that into about 50 core, what I call KPIs here. I know I'm stealing the term from the SLA space. We identify all the key vendors. We get them to fill out this very rigorous survey. We then do demos and other briefings, and then we conduct the user interviews to come up with the end result. In order for something to be measured in the radar, we have these 3 requirements. These have to be generally available features. It has to be a GA release. It has to have been self-contained within the package. So any feature they want to claim has to also be included in the pricing that we're evaluating. So if there are add-ons, and you want credit for those add-ons as a vendor, you also have to incorporate that in the price analysis. And then they have to be features that are publicly documented and verifiable. So I'm going to quickly highlight how BMC placed in that report this time. BMC has consistently been the highest scoring product in this report, and they were again in 2019. As you can see, they far exceed the market average on most of the characteristics here. And really, they're pushing the envelope. Part of the reason they stay in this leading position is because they're really pushing against all of these trends I've been talking about, and Tim's going to go into some detail here in a moment about that. One of the key ones, I think, is this as-code orchestration really dovetails nicely with the DevOps folks, and Tim's going to really cover what that means. And we always see very strong reviews with BMC customers. So they were, once again, a value leader. That's the top part of the report. It's a strong product, and they're actively adapting to all of these trends. And really, when I look at the market, it's a very mature product category. I mean, workload automation has been around 40, maybe 45 years. From the very beginning, you had to worry about, as soon as you had 2 different applications to run, you had to start to worry about scheduling. And we see from our research that it's pretty saturated. Most enterprise organizations are running some form of this tool. It's about 71% of the market is running one of these, what I would consider enterprise class tools. Of course, the rest are using, a variety of the more environment-specific tools. But as a market, we've seen it mature. It's got great, use in the marketplace. But it really was kind of, maybe if you reach back 8 or 10 years ago, it was kind of becoming more sleepy as a market and in its older age. And then we see a new wave of innovation. And it's really kind of in a rebirth as we're seeing it's becoming very important to achieve this digital transformation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim, and he's going to get into some details about exactly how BMC has been addressing these trends and bringing this rebirth to this market. So Tim, with that, I'll let you take over.
Oh, thank you, Dan. It's always a pleasure to present with you. I love the information that you share, and I appreciate you making the introduction to us. So I'm going to go through a few examples, and I think hopefully illustrate some of the key trends and observations that Dan's research has pointed out. So one of the things that we have recognized over the, maybe the past 5 to 10 years, but really it's starting to accelerate, is what I'm going to call the shift to an application-centric world. So This triangle represents kind of the traditional, maybe more traditional focus of investment by IT organizations. You can see a lot of it is on the bottom part of the triangle. That's data and infrastructure. You've got a middle tier of operations folks that tend to take good care of that data and infrastructure and run a few very important kind of core applications that serve the business. And this model of investment and focus is really coming under a tremendous change. This idea was actually given to us by Michael Ganella, who's the CIO of Salesforce. And we met with him, and his explanation for things really changed the perspective of how we see the market and how the market is evolving. Today, infrastructure in the cloud at the bottom of the triangle is really focused to try and be as ephemeral and as on-demand as possible to reduce cost wherever organizations can. The middle tier of operations is transitioning in a big way to DevOps and DevOps-related practices. And then the action for this digital transformation wave that Dan so eloquently described is really the action is in the applications. And this is where people are putting a tremendous amount of focus. And what we view this as is kind of the idea of what we call run and reinvent. Companies are in transition with all the stress that Dan described. They're trying to literally modify and change the arc of their business. It's a little bit like running down the road in a car trying to change one of your tires at 60 miles an hour. It's very, very difficult to do. So how does this really impact IT organizations? What's really going on? Well, years ago, you had a few personas on the left, and they were responsible for delivering some very important but a few kind of critical business services that you see over on the right. And quite frankly, the technology that was used to make that happen was relatively complex, but it wasn't overpowering, right? This was kind of the blue triangle that I showed on the last slide. What's changing, of course, today is the explosion of personas on the left and the absolute unbelievable transition that we're seeing on the right to digital services that companies are demanding and really must have to run their business today. So you've still got the old things like payroll and some of those things, but you also have lots of hot new things of predictive maintenance and fraud detection and different things like that. And the explosion of technologies in the middle is amazing. And I don't need to tell you guys this. Y'all know this. But here's a more interesting thing that we've seen lately over the last 3 years, that even with all of the new personas that have to interact with this technology stack that you see in the middle to deliver these services, what's happening now is companies are literally unplugging applications that they've had running for several years and plugging in something new that serves them better. A great example might be an analytics package that is just going to give them a better opportunity to view their business in real time. They unplug their old one and plug their new one in, and they expect it to run. So to deliver on this, what we believe is very important is for companies to take an end-to-end approach to orchestrating all these workflows. The user personas that you see, and it's everybody, it's IT, it's business users, it's DevOps teams, everybody needs to have an abstraction layer that they can look at, view, monitor, and manage, and orchestrate all of the digital services that you see on the right. It's ever-changing. So another comment that Dan made earlier is this idea of innovation, and what is the demand of the new digital transformation era that we're in today? Well, one of the demands is companies must get applications into production faster. Obviously, you're not making any money off your new application if it's not in production, and people are doing lots of upgrades to applications and data sources that have been in place for a long time, so they need to make changes, and they need to get those changes into production quickly. Well, traditionally, you'd have developers over on the left, and they'd develop code, and they'd send that code to the scheduling team in operations, who would then look at it and decide if it was right, if it was going to work. Maybe they found some errors. Sometimes they would be just overwhelmed, and so they would send those tickets back to the developers to redo something, and what this created was a bottleneck, and things just did not flow into production like companies needed. And this is a situation that even the best DevOps teams that we see still have, that manual push into production. And what does this create? It creates chaos and inefficiency. So we know this from many of our customers. And so our view of this is one way that we believe that we can help people, and we're doing it today, is by taking this shift left as code orchestration approach. Folks in the line of business, product teams and product management organizations are desperately trying to get feedback from the market into their product and into production faster and more effectively, and all in the pursuit of digital transformation and competitive advantage in the market. So they would like to see literally their ideas flowing directly through the CI/CD tool chain, the automation tool chain, and into production. And we believe it's very, very important for companies to shift the idea of managing their applications in production with tools like Control-M with an as-code approach. Literally put the code to manage and monitor and orchestrate your applications right in with the logic code, just like the idea of infrastructure as code. So we believe this is a very, very important new model to accelerate applications into production. So let me give you just a quick example. Dan mentioned a use case that we had from a company that's extremely innovative, but let me just tell you a little bit how this works. So this is a predictive maintenance use case, and many, many companies have predictive maintenance situations, but it might also just be predicting other things like e-commerce applications that are trying to do customer sentiment prediction, etc. So it's a very common use case. Along the bottom, you see a fairly straightforward, you could call it a data pipeline, if you will. So the idea is to provision a Hadoop cluster on the cloud. In this particular customer's case, it's an AWS cloud, but you would provision a Hadoop cluster. Then you would transfer IoT data to that Hadoop cluster. And this IoT data happens to come from sensors that are built into the trucks that this company manufactures. So they take all of this sensor data and they put it into the Hadoop cluster, and they run analytics through a Hive and a typical Hive and Spark process. Then when they get their results, they transfer that data out of Hadoop and take action on it. So some things are going to go into a data repository like Snowflake. Some of the results go immediately into a tool like Tableau, where they can present dashboards to let everybody know what's going on. Another activity would be if there is a situation in that vehicle, obviously you want to send a notification to that particular vehicle or the driver of that vehicle, and then potentially schedule maintenance. So this is a pretty straightforward data pipeline, but let me tell you where this gets complex. You can see across the top that there are systems of record, say, that are on premises that contain all kinds of information that's really required to make this digital service valuable for the driver of that truck and the owners of that fleet. So let me give you an example. So maybe what you find out in your analytics is a truck that happens to be flying down the road in Nebraska is going to get a failure in its braking system. Well, you need to be able to compare that particular vehicle to data from the CRM system. Which customer is that? Who owns that truck? Then you also want to look at where that truck is. It's in the middle of Nebraska. So you need to look at inventory parts from your inventory system. Are there inventory parts at a certified dealer or a repair depot in that area where you could direct that vehicle? What is the status of the warranty under that for that particular vehicle? Do you need to have a warranty service done, or is it a for-fee service? Then you want to look and make sure that you have a calendar of your field service organization. Do you need to have somebody on site? Do you have somebody in the service depot who's authorized to work on this particular system on that vehicle, etc.? So you have to take not only the IoT data that you get from the vehicles, but you've got to use all of your other data to make sure that you can actually deliver the service that your customer is expecting. So this is a very typical application, but most importantly, at the end of all of this, you better be sure that you terminate your Hadoop cluster. Otherwise, you could have a tremendous bill that you run up there and completely blow your cost metrics out of the water. So this happens to be a real live case. This is one of our customers. It's Navistar. They make large over-the-road vehicles and school buses. And these are some of the results that they were able to deliver to their customers, their fleet customers that own their trucks. And what's really amazing about this, going back to what Dan said, is this is a 100-plus-year-old company, heavy truck manufacturing outfit, and they've created a completely net new digital service they call On Command by being able to do this. And Control-M sits at the very heart of that use case and that set of workflows and orchestrations that we deliver this solution. And you can see the business outcomes on the right of this page. So this is the real world that we all live in. And what Control-M allows you to do is simplify those complex workflows like we showed in that chaos slide with all those different technologies. You have end-to-end visibility even across a hybrid cloud. You can embed with as-code orchestration into your DevOps toolchain, and you can do that simplified scaled data pipeline example like I just mentioned with Navistar. But not only do you get this with Control-M, you get a very important and the and is, as Dan mentioned, all of the deep operational orchestration standards that you need to run your business for managing compliance and governance, delivering on those digital services with SLAs that meet the business needs, and to provide the availability of all of that capability to a variety of different personas in the way that they want to consume it, whether it's as code, whether it's as a GUI, whichever they prefer. Control-M allows them to interface and drive the business the way they want. So, in conclusion, we are excited about where the market is. We're excited about the challenges that digital transformation is creating for our customers. We work hand-to-hand with our customers to help them literally run and reinvent their business with agility and a cost-effective opportunity to drive their top line. So thank you all for your time. It's a delight to be able to speak with you. And now, Raleigh, I think we're going to open this up to questions for Dan and myself.
Great. Thank you, Tim. If you have questions, you can log them now using the Q&A functionality. Tim, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the questions. The first one is the as-code idea strictly for DevOps teams?
Well, no, it's not really. The as-code idea has been around for a while. I mean, a lot of folks in cloud operations understand the benefits of doing things like infrastructure as code. That's a pretty common type of use case or application. So what we've done is we've opened up Control-M with what we call our automation API, so that you can actually code the syntax that Control-M is looking for right into your code stream, put it into Git or whatever data repository you're using, let that orchestration code flow through your tool chain that you're automating your CI/CD pipeline, and push it into production with everything else. But it's not strictly a DevOps term, but it is used widely in DevOps.
Thanks for that insight, Tim. Dan, jumping over to you, you talked about enlightened WLA users with a broad view of WLA. What are the characteristics of companies that hold this enlightened view?
Well, as you know, my example of the movie theater company is one, and then Tim used the example of Navistar, a 100-year-old company in the heavy equipment, trucking space. So, one way to look at the answer to that is it really isn't anything to do with the age of the company, whether it was a born in the cloud company or a traditional company. It's more a mindset. It's really starts with how do you view IT in and its ability to make your business go better. Whether better means resolving problems quicker, giving customers a different way to interact, growing revenues, whatever your objectives are. Having first the idea that IT is a key part of that, that automation as a strategy mentality, and then really doing a better job of bringing everybody together to bear on that problem and letting them, interact and improve the processes with the tools, that they think are going to help them. So a lot of these companies, they've taken this broader view and just said, find the best answer, and they give people the freedom then to kind of interact. And so when they take an approach around workload, and they expand who gets access to either the reporting or the stream of how things get scheduled in the first place. And Tim's diagram of that sort of chaos that can happen and in the DevOps process, that back and forth. What I think about this as code that Tim was just talking about, it really lets everybody talk to each other in the language they want to talk in. So developers don't want to deal with learning an application and dealing through some graphical user interface. I mean, they benefit from that overview that you get from all the workflows in a graphical form, that they want to put their details in the text editor where they work. So, being able to define that in JSON lets them interact where they interact. Operators, on the other hand, are used to this tool. They need to be able to tweak and place things using what they use, and business users need outputs that are in a form and on a device that matter to them. And so it's this mentality of IT is important, people need to work together, and let's actually have automation as a strategy. And if they take that approach, they end up here and they do good things, and it really has nothing to do about industry or age or anything else.
Dan, can I add something to that?
Absolutely.
I think another character, I loved your answer, and I think another characteristic I would add is IT organizations that are able to embrace the decentralized kind of model that a lot of their line of business customers internally are looking for, with capabilities that allow the line of business teams to go as fast as they'd like to go, but also provide that kind of governance and ability to bring everything together so that you deliver the stability that goes with the speed. I think companies that start that and embrace that decentralized way of working to serve their line of business and internal customers, I think those are characteristics that we see of people that are kind of out in the lead in this idea, kind of, Dan, to your point about, the enlightened view.
Right, and one of the scheduling people that I interviewed during the radar process, who was in that theater company, he said, here's a guy who's managing a scheduling team deep in the bowels of the IT organization. But he interacts with business people regularly, and he said, every time I get a chance to talk to one of our business end users, I ask them, if I could give you a button to press to automate one part of your job, what pain point could I help you with? What could we do if you had a one-press button to accomplish a task that's otherwise very manual for you? And it's just that mindset of connecting those people. I mean, here's someone from the bowels of the IT operation talking to individual theater managers, right? I mean, it's that dialogue. So it really is that mindset, I think. And you're right, Tim. Thanks for your add on there.
Thank you both. Dan, another question that came in is, if the WLA category of products is in a new cycle of innovation, then what does WLA look like in 5 years?
Yeah, wow. I wish I had that crystal ball. I guess I have some insights there, and I'm sure Tim has some thoughts on this too. I think, my hope for it, and I really think we're seeing the trends for this, is that it becomes recognized as not, a 40-year-old tool that only, a team of schedulers needs to worry about. And, it helps them coordinate things I don't want to think about as a business person, and, that older view, but that it becomes this orchestrator of automation. That, we do see a unification, fewer tools with broader function makes the environment, I think, calmer and easier to work in. So I think we're going to see a continuation of, the sort of as code model that Tim has talked about. It'll be wrapped up more in the CI/CD cycle. More just there's Tim's slide with the personas, right? There's more people are actually touching and interacting with the outputs or the inputs of workload. They might not even realize that that's what the tool is, but it's touching more things and more people are around it, and I think we're going to see that continue. But how it what it actually looks like 5 years from now, I'm not sure, but I think it's going to undergo a lot more change, and its use is going to continue to broaden. And Tim, you may have a different perspective.
Yeah, let me just throw in a couple. I agree 100% with what you're saying. A couple of areas I think that we'll see the market continue to evolve toward, and I'll just kind of be general about this, but I think with Dan mentioned how rapidly people are literally moving to the cloud, and they've moved tons of stuff to the cloud already, but that's going to continue. And I think you're going to see a lot more kind of native cloud integration across kind of the whole stack of cloud vendor services. So the cloud vendors have actually really figured out that things like workload automation and job scheduling and this orchestration stuff is pretty darn important, and they're putting in some services. I think the thing that we are seeing is people wanting to do and use those services, but also to be able to work across a hybrid environment. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that going forward. I would also make a prediction here that you'll see more uses of machine learning around things like predictive SLAs and optimization analytics. I think we'll see, Dan mentioned it, but I really think this is important, is this evolution of consumption models and serving up the users in the way that they want to interact with these capabilities, and really embrace that self-service and decentralized way of working. I think those are coming. And then lastly, maybe a little bit more technical, but there's a lot of event and streaming situations out there now, and this is exploding with the advent of more data analytics and people using data to drive really kind of low-level kinds of activities across the company, and we see that really taking off. So a lot more capability around that I think you're going to see in the future as well.
Thanks, Tim. A question for you is, we are using AWS and some of their integrated tools. How does that work with WLA solutions like Control-M?
Well, it usually works really well. I can't speak specifically for some of the other folks that are in the industry, but it's a trend that's been going on for a while, so naturally I think we're all aware of it. With respect to Control-M, we have built interfaces to important services that you see in the AWS world, but also in the Azure world. Google Cloud is coming for us as well. So there's a lot of ways to leverage the tools that the cloud vendors provide and take advantage of the capabilities of a solution like Control-M to get the best of both worlds and to link your on-premises capabilities that you may want to keep on-premises for a long time. It's perfectly acceptable to do that and still get the benefit of the kind of elastic compute capability of the cloud. And we're embracing that. We're partnering with the cloud vendors and definitely supporting those environments in a deep and native way.
Great, good to know. Thank you. And I wanted to thank our audience for joining us today. That is going to wrap up today's webinar. As I mentioned, you will be receiving a follow-up email from EMA that will include resources from today's webinar. So I hope you will check that email out. And I hope that we will see you at a future EMA webinar. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.